Motion for debate. Jo Cox, Civility Commission, Baroness Royal of Blaisdon.
My Lords, like many in this House, I had the privilege of knowing Jo. 10 years on from that devastating loss, I want first to pay my respects and send my condolences to her remarkable family who've shown such strength and courage. We know that this week will be particularly challenging for them. Jo was petite in stature, but she was a giant in so many ways. She had a remarkable zest for life. She was a catalyst for action in her constituency and in the wider world, where she worked in international development, in which she witnessed firsthand the impact of conflict and inequality. She was a courageous campaigner against injustice and bigotry in this country and the wider world. She was a feminist, a humanitarian who loved her fellow human beings. She believed in service. Most importantly, she was a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife, and she was a fantastic friend to many. Jo inspired love and hope, and it was for that reason, following her appalling murder, there was an outpouring of love as well as grief. Jo's murder was an act driven by extremism and division, but people responded not with fear, but with something that Jo believed in, connection. And in December of that year, friends and family set up the Jo Cox Foundation to pursue the issues about which Jo was passionate, guided by her values and her principles. It's an immense honour to serve as chair of the Jo Cox Foundation. Our vision is as for a society underpinned by her enduring belief that we have far more in common than that which divides us. One where our communities and our democracy are strengthened by connection and respect across difference, with decency and civility in public life. A decade on, our work is more important than ever. Sadly, despite the collective promises made 10 years ago to address hate, foster unity and bridge divisions, our society is more fractured and communities more divided. Loneliness remains a profound public health crisis, and the abuse and intimidation of elected representatives has intensified. This 10-year mark is not only a moment for remembrance, it is a call to action. Social connection is not just a nice to have, it's a bedrock of a safe, resilient society, and it's fundamental to the healthy functioning of our democracy. The good news, the heartening news, is that desire to connect is fiercely alive. New research by the Jo Cox Foundation, in partnership with More in Common UK, shows that while many feel community ties have weakened, 1 in 3 people actively want to improve their connection to those around them. Crucially, those who are currently the least connected are the ones who want to connect the most. The issue lies in the systemic barriers to that connection: financial hardship, anxiety amongst young people, online interactions replacing real-life communities, and deepening political polarisation. So we must act. We have a duty to act. We urgently need to bring people together wherever possible in person, to support our young people to access the places, relationships and opportunities to belong, to give communities the resources and power to take forward community-led social action themselves, and to remove the barriers to connection, whether that be creating accessible and affordable places to connect, or more intentionally addressing loneliness by adopting our joint call to action for a new cross-government action plan on loneliness and connection. Jo was dedicated to combating loneliness and formed an independent cross-party commission of MPs and charities. This led to the appointment of the First Minister for Loneliness, Dame Tracy Crouch, who I'm delighted to say is now on our board. And I pay tribute to the noble Baroness May for having implemented that, for having drawn Tracy into the government. As we're all aware, we now have an epidemic of loneliness, especially among young people, with a profound impact on individuals, on society, on the NHS, and on productivity. When lonely people are isolated in their rooms, they're sometimes prey to social media algorithms that exacerbate divisions and can lead to violence, sometimes political abuse and aggression. Understanding the importance of meaningful social connection, together with other members of the Loneliness Policy Action Group, we have launched a cross-government call to action, a set of policy calls aimed at embedding loneliness prevention and connection more deeply across government policy and public services. I warmly welcome the government's report published earlier this week on loneliness, isolation and social connection among boys and young men in England, but I would be grateful if my noble friend the Minister would agree to meet with me and my colleagues to discuss much needed cross-government action. I do not suggest that the recent horrendous murders in Southampton and Belfast were the result of loneliness, but I have no doubt that the violence that ensued was whipped up by social media in toxic online spaces, by algorithms, by anger, by division in our fractured societies. Fear of the other was weaponised. Yet there are extraordinary examples of generosity in words and deeds, like the father of Henry Novak and those who gave shelter those in fear from racist thugs in Belfast. There's much work to be done to bring people together, to break down barriers, to nurture understanding and heal divides, to enable people to listen, to talk to each other, to disagree agreeably. Polarisation in our politics adds to the ferment. Politics faces a crisis of connection, confidence and safety. Both Jo and Sir David Amess were murdered by extremists whilst carrying out their democratic duty in their constituencies. Since then, abuse and intimidation of elected representatives and candidates have intensified. The political atmosphere is becoming increasingly hostile. Reported crimes against MPs have more than doubled since 2019. 96% have experienced threatening behaviour, with threats of sexual violence disproportionately targeted at women, minority and disabled MPs. In a question for short debate 2 weeks ago, we heard of the intolerable abuse suffered by councillors, both online and in person. Our political system is under attack. Our democracy is being undermined. The pressures fall disproportionately on women and those already underrepresented in our democracy, the very people whose participation makes our institutions more representative and more resilient. This risks a reversal of progress on political diversity. A Girl Guiding survey found that a third of girls and young women are deterred from pursuing careers in politics because of the hostility that high-profile women face online. We're moving towards a culture where abuse is dismissed as part of the job. It is not, and we must reject the growing normalisation of abuse and intimidation. This is a systemic problem rooted in wider inequalities and pressures around the political ecosystem. This is a direct threat to our democracy. Talented people are stepping down, not standing in the first place, and self-censoring. We need an inclusive democracy, one in which people feel safe and confident to participate in robust but respectful debate. Freedom of speech is the cornerstone of our democracy, but it must never be used to incite violence, spread hatred or justify harassment. Language matters, and we must ensure that we never return to the toxic public discourse that we endured during the Brexit debate. We must not allow our country to be dominated by extreme voices. We must deplore the racist voices and policies of Restore, which is backed by Elon Musk and would welcome Tommy Robinson as a member. We must choose hope over hate. The Jo Cox Civility Commission has successfully advocated for improvements, for example, expanded police support and security coordination for elected representatives, making security costs exempt from election spending limits, ending the requirements for councillors to publish their addresses on council websites, improving specific guidance for families of MPs. It is outrageous that families of MPs and councillors are targeted and subjected to abuse. But we must go further. We call for further change, including for political parties to enforce higher standards of conduct, for social media companies to make their platforms safer, and for improved media, digital and political literacy for all ages. I want to end on a positive note, a note of hope. For every act of division, there are hundreds of acts of connection and community up and down the 4 nations. We see this every year during the Great Get-Together, which will take place this weekend. Thousands of people across the country reject division and step out of their comfort zones to get together with friends, neighbours, people with whom they've never met before, in parks, picnics, community halls and gardens, to eat, drink, bake, sing, run or merely sit in the sun and talk over a cup of tea. It's the living embodiment of Jo's belief that we have more in common than that which divides us. I thank the many friends in this House who have engaged and who continue to engage with the important work of the Jo Cox Foundation. It is the responsibility of every one of us to foster community and connection and to build a more respectful political culture. We should be guided by Jo's words, but rather than repeating them, we should act on them.
Is that this motion be agreed to?
My Lords, it's an honour to follow Baroness Royal and her introduction of this important and timely debate. I agree with everything that she has said, and I congratulate her for her work as chair of the Jo Cox Foundation and for this report, which I wholeheartedly support as well. Jo's core belief, as we've been told, was that we had more in common than what divides us. This is an important challenge because often we emphasise our different identities and forget to celebrate what we have in common, our British identity, obsess about the relatively small number of things that go wrong and forget to celebrate the millions of things that go right across our country every day. It's like the players and fans leaving the England game in Dallas last night and demanding an independent inquiry into who was to blame for Croatia's 2 goals and forgetting to mention that we scored 4 and won the game comfortably. So Jo's sister, Kim Ledbetter MP, said yesterday, we've got to make sure the voices of positivity and perseverance and resilience are the ones that are amplified. I agree. We call ourselves the United Kingdom, but united isn't just an adjective, it's a verb too. So I would like to use my time to remind ourselves of the amazing things this country, which we are privileged to call home, has done and is doing. We have given the world its most widely spoken language with 2.3 billion speakers. It's a language of the internet, of international trade and of navigation. William Shakespeare perfected in the language into the greatest literary work of all time. We are the mother of parliaments. We are surrounded here by statues of those who witnessed the signing of the Magna Carta, which established basic human rights and set limits on government. English contract law is the basis of international trade. Even time is measured from the Greenwich meridian, which has established longitude as well, which opened up the oceans for navigations. We're home to the first industrial revolution, birthplace of the railways. We're a G7 nation, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We play a leading role in the Commonwealth. We're a nuclear power, a cornerstone of the NATO alliance. The first meetings of the United Nations General Assembly and the UN Security Council took place just a few hundred yards from here, 80 years ago this year. We've stood alone against tyranny, stood up for freedom. We've stood by our allies. We led the abolition of slavery and offered sanctuary to those who were persecuted. This year, the UK overtook India to become the 5th largest economy in the world. London is consistently ranked alongside New York as the world's leading financial centre. The UK is recognised as being a world leader in fintech, medical research and AI. The industry is not of the past, but of the future. The World Wide Web was invented by a Brit, Tim Berners-Lee. Alan Turing was the father of AI. Geoffrey Hinton, the father of machine learning. Demis Hassabis is the brain behind Google DeepMind. We have more unicorn businesses, billion-dollar tech companies, in this country than Germany and France combined. And on the day in which we welcome into your Lordship's house another great Olympian in Baroness Granger, we should remind ourselves that we gave the world so many of its great sports, football, cricket, tennis, and rugby, and of course the Paralympics, all invented here. The Premier League is the most watched sports league in the world, broadcast to over 200 countries. Formula One is the most technical of all sports, and 7 out of the 10 teams are based here. When Lewis Hamilton won in Barcelona on Sunday, he stood on an all-British podium and our national anthem was played. It is the land of the Enlightenment. Hume, Smith, Locke, Newton's laws of motion, Darwin's theory of evolution continue to shape our understanding of the world. It is home to the National Health Service, the envy of the world. We are home to some of the greatest medical innovations, Fleming's penicillin, IVF, CT, MRI scans, Crick, Watson and Franklin's discovery of the structure of DNA, the building block of life itself. And we are now at the forefront of vaccine development around the world. We are home to 4 of the top 10 universities in the world. We have won 148 Nobel Prizes, second only to the United States. Cambridge University alone has been awarded more Nobel Prizes than Germany. It's time for us to celebrate who we are, what we have in common, to drown out the voices of pessimism and division who've had their day, It's a privilege to live in this country, but that privilege comes with duties and responsibility to contribute to it and to make it even better. That will require us to come together, to be united, not just in name, but in nature and purpose too. That is what Jo Cox stood for, and that is what we must now work for.
Yeah, my lords, what an honour it is to follow. What an amazing tour de force from the noble Lord Bates. Thank you so much. I'm going to take that speech and print it out and stick it on my mirror and have it as an affirmation in the mornings. So, my lords, it is a real honour to take part in this debate, and I pay tribute to my noble friend for her work as chair of the Jo Cox Foundation. As we reflect on the work of the Jo Cox Civility Commission, we are reminded, as we've already heard, of Jo's values and how she lived her life and her unwavering belief that a kinder, fairer, more tolerant society is within our reach. She understood, as we've heard, that connection is not an abstract ideal, but something practiced daily through listening, through respectful disagreement, and through recognising our shared humanity. And yes, her words that we have more in common than that which divides us are an aspiration, but they are a challenge to us all, and we must keep them in mind as we go forward in our work in this House. This challenge feels especially urgent today. The national discourse has become increasingly strained. Polarisation and declining trust and a harsher tone in public discourse is not simply a political concern. They affect how people relate to one another and how resilient our communities can be. The Civility Commission's findings make clear that the health of our democracy, as we have heard, depends not only on strong institutions, but on strong relationships between citizens, between us. If we are serious about rebuilding trust, we must recognise the essential role of our civil society. Across the country, charities, voluntary groups and community organisations create those spaces that we need, where people meet not as opponents, but as neighbours and collaborators. They foster belonging, participation and shared purpose. I see this every day, my lords, in the work that I do with the United Youth Foundation, in organisations such as the Scouts, the Guides we've already heard from, St John's Ambulance, the Cadets, the Police and the Fire Cadets, all of these youth organisations. They bring young people from all backgrounds together. They learn teamwork, service, responsibility. They form bonds that transcend difference and build the foundations of an active civil partnership. Each week, in communities up and down the country, more than 1 million young people are supported by over 250,000 trained volunteers. These local groups give young people a shared identity rooted in service, teamwork, belonging. They also create opportunities for young people to build mutual understanding and enhance community cohesion. Their impact is strongest because local delivery is supported by national organisations that have the evidence, the oversight and the safeguarding frameworks to give young people the safe places that they need to ensure these programmes are effective. And when young people come together in these settings, differences begin to recede. They learn to lead, to listen and to support one another. They discover that citizenship is not merely a concept, but something to be actively lived. This is how community identity and resilience is fostered through shared experience and participation. Yet, I do have to say, my lords, that despite our government's best intentions, funding for these groups is shaky. The Uniformed Youth Fund comes to an end, and this does jeopardise many of the new places that were created through that work in areas particularly of social deprivation. And I get that the government needs to review funding streams to align with the new youth strategy, which I wholeheartedly welcome. But we can't afford a hiatus, and our communities do need better. Civil society's contribution extends well beyond youth provision, with over 170,000 charities and millions of volunteers. It plays a significant role in both our social fabric and our economy too. Yet its true strength lies in the trust it commands. These organisations are deeply rooted in the communities they serve, reaching individuals who may feel disconnected, loneliness, as we've heard, from formal institutions, and creating opportunities for meaningful engagement across differences. And yes, we did see this during COVID, but we also saw it through moments of unrest, such as in Southport and in Belfast only very recently, where local people come together to repair the damage that's been done to their community, both physically with brooms, but also with support and for other community members. So by doing this, these community groups give us all hope, as we heard from Lord Bates. So we must yet also acknowledge the growing tensions that exist. Demand for services provided by civil society continue to rise, while funding and stability have not kept pace. We're asking more of these organisations at a time when many are under strain. This is especially true for youth services, where the work being done is not short-term programme delivery, but the shaping of confident, resilient citizens. So will the Minister investigate the hiatus I've talked about and look at what can be done to stabilise the funding for the youth strategy? So, my Lords, government does have a crucial role to play here. The civil society covenant is an important step, and I welcome that, and it's very important, the work that's being done there. It's essential to the health of our democracy, and I welcome again the work of the Jo Cox Foundation, and we remember her today with love and with sadness.
Yeah.
My Lords, firstly I'd like to start to say a wonderful list from Lord Bates, who I will also be printing a copy of, because it is very, very uplifting. My Lords, I did not know Jo Cox. I never had the privilege of hearing her speak, but in the years since her murder, I have come to understand her through the words of those who did, and what they describe as somebody who believed with total conviction that politics could be a force for good, that public life could be conducted with decency, that you could argue hard but still treat your opponents as human beings worthy of respect. It is in that spirit, her spirit, that I support the work of the Jo Cox Foundation and the Civility Commission, and in particular 2 recommendations that I wish to speak on today: the urgent need to regulate social media platforms and the responsibility of all of us to model the behaviour that we want to see. I have spoken in this chamber, in this house before, about the abuse and intimidation of elected councillors. I've described cars being set alight, candidates stalked, a candidate punched unconscious on a doorstep, brilliant councillors like Stockton Council Leader, Councillor Lisa Evans, who I spoke to earlier, who experienced a horrendous online abuse, including doctored AI images of herself being published online, who now says the abuse is something that she is used to. This normalisation is unacceptable in our democracy. Over the last few weeks, many of us from many minority communities have begun to question whether we are truly welcome in this country anymore. Something has shifted in our discourse, and there seems to be a permission to say and behave without... there seems to be a permission to say whatever we want and behave without boundaries, regardless of the impact, from both left and right. I said then that we are failing the people who make local democracy work, and I say the same again today. When speaking to colleagues, councillors, MPs and activists, the scale of the problem has significantly worsened. And through the Civility Commission, we have a clear cross-party evidence-based framework of what needs to be done. So firstly, on social media, the Commission calls on platforms to acknowledge the dramatic significance of local politicians, not just MPs and peers, but councillors, and to also provide better and faster routes for reporting abuse and misinformation. It calls on Ofcom to specifically address the abuse of elected representatives. The evidence of what happens when platforms abandon that responsibility is now stark and quantified. My Lords, this House may be aware of the work of the Centre of Countering Digital Hate. Their report, Safety Off, published just this month, should be required reading for anyone who doubts the scale of what we are facing. In January 2025, Meta rolled back its content moderation policies, cutting proactive enforcement of rules against violence, incitement, hateful conduct and bullying. The CCDH predicted a surge in abuse. What they found when they analysed nearly 8 million Facebook comments directed at members of Congress was that abuse did not merely surge, it skyrocketed. Abuse comments overall tripled, violent threats and hate quadrupled. And this was not just directed only on one side of the political aisle. The CCDH named their report Safety Off because that's precisely what Meta did. It switched off safety. When a platform with billions of users removes the guardrails against violent conduct, violence surges. This is not a correlation, it is causation. The platforms know it and they choose it anyway. I am mindful that we are speaking in a British context and there are benefits to social media, but the platforms are the same, the algorithms are the same, the business model which rewards engagement is the same. This crosses borders. It shapes the environment, local, national and global. Research makes it clear that the majority of counsellors who experience abuse experience it online. It is targeted, coordinated and disproportionately affects women, people of colour and those from minority communities, precisely the people whose presence in our politics make it more representative and more reflective of the country it serves. When abuse drives out people, we are not just losing individuals, we are making our politics narrower and doing so we are making it weaker. The Commission's second recommendation is harder, which I'll speak to. It asks all of us involved in politics to model respectful behaviour in the chamber, online, in public life, and it asks us to consider carefully the impact of our words on public discourse. I think of Jo Cox here again. Those who knew of her speak of somebody who, by instinct, was a builder of bridges, who did not mistake loudness for strength or contempt for conviction, who understood that the way you argue matters just as much as what you argue for. We live in a political moment that rewards the opposite, where outrage drives engagement, where inflammatory language spreads further and faster than measured argument, when the easiest path to a news cycle is to treat your opponent not as somebody with a different view, but as an enemy to be destroyed, when jokes are made about an arson attack on the Prime Minister's home. And politicians at every level are not just merely victims of this culture, we are sometimes the architects. My lords, when a public figure uses demonising language, it does not stay within the walls of Westminster. It travels, it gives permission, it is heard by the councillor chairing a planning meeting or by the activist sending a message at midnight. Online and offline abuse feed each other. What says in public life shapes what is considered acceptable online, and what is permitted online shapes what happens on our street. The Commission asks us to take responsibility for that, not to be silenced, not to abandon robust debate. Jo Cox herself fiercely believed in that, but to recognise that there is a difference between challenging an argument and degrading a person, between holding a power to account and making public life uninhabitable. My lords, 10 years on from Jo Cox's murder, the threat to our democracy has not receded. It has changed shape, moved online, become faster and more persuasive, and it is actively enabled by the choices of the wealthiest companies in human history. The response of the Commission is called for is to do the practical things. Yes, regulate the platforms, protect the candidates, resource the police, but also do the harder thing. Be the politician that you want others to be. I truly believe that we can, and I remain defiant against hate and division. We have far more in common with each other than the things that divide us. It remains one of the most important sentences in modern British politics, and it remains, a decade on, the work we still have not finished.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
My lords, Jo Cox will always be remembered for her belief that we have far more in common than that which divides us. In today's often angry and fractured political climate, these words feel as important and as necessary as ever. They are a reminder of the kind of politics and scrutiny and society many people want to see. I was profoundly shaped by the inaugural Jo Cox Women in Leadership programme, established in her memory to support more women into public life. Many women from that first cohort have gone on to serve in leadership roles across public life. I'm proud to sit on these benches with my noble friend, the Baroness Hyde of Bemerton, who's part of our first cohort. That experience reinforced how important it is that politics feels open to people from every background, especially those who are too often excluded from leadership or unheard in various institutions. The lived experience, insight and perspectives we bring to the table matter. They make our politics stronger, our decisions better, and our democracy more representative. The Commission recognises that abuse, intimidation and hostility are not simply unpleasant features of modern politics. They silence voices, drive good people away from public service, and weaken democratic participation itself. If people feel unable to engage in public life because of fear, intimidation, or abuse, our democracy is poorer for it. We also know that the abuse is not experienced equally. Women, people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and younger representatives are too often subjected to particularly vicious abuse. If that becomes normalised, we risk creating a politics where only the most privileged or thick-skinned feel able to participate. That cannot be acceptable in a healthy democracy. My Lords, civility does not mean avoiding disagreement. Democracy depends on debate, challenge and scrutiny, but there is a profound difference between disagreement and dehumanisation. Freedom of speech is fundamental, but so are responsibility and accountability. Words can inspire and unite, but they can also wound and divide. Too often, anger now travels faster than understanding. Social media can reward outrage over reflection and division over dialogue. Hostility and misinformation are amplified in ways that deepen divisions rather than understanding. That is why the Commission's focus on political and media literacy is so important. In an age of misinformation and polarisation, helping people develop the confidence and critical thinking skills to question and challenge what they see online and what they hear has become more important than ever. If we are honest, that lesson may not be limited to just young people. In Lewisham, I've seen the value of bringing people together across differences and generations through interfaith work, libraries, community spaces, and civic participation. The more people from different backgrounds, communities, and cultures are able to learn from one another, share experiences, and listen with openness, the stronger understanding, respect, and trust between us becomes. That is why strengthening civility and strengthening community must go hand in hand. There must be stronger codes of conduct and higher standards of behaviour at all levels of public life. In public life, language and behaviour that would be unacceptable elsewhere are sometimes dismissed as simply part of politics. Those in public life at every level must lead by example, through tone that we set, the respect we show, and through the standards we uphold. One of the greatest tributes we can pay to Jo Cox's memory is to build a politics where more people feel able to step forward and contribute, where different voices are welcomed, and where we recognise that our differences need not divide us. Because when people are encouraged to participate rather than being pushed away, our democracy, our communities, and our country are stronger for it. And my Lords, that is a responsibility that we all must share. Thank you.
My Lords, I can't disagree with what the Noble Baroness Lady Dacras has just shared with us, and particularly I think that this House and the other place welcomes many women that have come through the Jo Cox programme, and that has made our politics much better and richer. We are far more united and have far more in common than which divides us. As we mark the 10th anniversary of the murder of Jo Cox MP, we are reminded of her profound legacy and the enduring power of those words. I thank the Noble Baroness Lady Royal for bringing this important debate before the House. I've been deeply moved by the many thoughtful contributions we have heard today. While I did not have the privilege of knowing Jo personally, I have, in a small way, come to know her through her sister, Kim. Most recently, we found ourselves on opposing sides in an interparliamentary tug-of-war, raising funds for Macmillan. It was a light-hearted moment, but also a powerful demonstration of what can bring us together, even across lines of difference. The Jo Cox Foundation Civility Commission, in its recent report, A Renewed Call to Action for the Devolved Nations, offers a series of important and practical recommendations which deserve careful consideration. The findings are rather striking. 75% of Senedd members and Welsh MPs reported that there are times when they feel unsafe in their role. Many elected representatives across the devolved nations do not feel able to participate in public life fully and freely. Abuse and intimidation, we are told, are driving people away from politics altogether. This is deeply concerning. A healthy democracy depends upon participation, on people from all backgrounds, feeling able to step forward, to serve and to speak without fear. The report's recommendations are constructive and grounded in collaboration between elected representatives and civil society. They include calls for the devolved parliaments to provide clearer guidance and support to members and their families, for adequate resourcing of Operation Ford, the police support mechanism for elected representatives, for political parties to enforce robust codes of conduct, and for all of us in public life to model respective behaviour. I particularly like to commend the recommendations specific to Wales. They are practical, clearly articulated, and directed to the appropriate institutions. At a time when political discourse can feel increasingly divisive, such clarity and focus are especially welcome. I've always believed that disagreement is both natural and necessary in a democracy. At its best, it sharpens thinking and leads to better outcomes. But tone does matter. And we're seeing with growing frequency forms of political discourse that are unnecessarily abrasive and at times seek to demonise entire communities. That does little to advance understanding and risks deepening division. We all, individually and collectively, have a responsibility to set a better example. Turning again to the report, its publication in the lead-up to elections in both Wales and Scotland may understandably have meant that some of its messages were lost amid the pre-election debate. However, even in the months since, there have been welcome signs of progress in Wales thanks to the report. The Senedd has begun piloting a social media monitoring scheme to support members and has published its report, A Senedd for All, a family-friendly and inclusive Parliament review, which includes proposals to address abuse, including the establishment of a safe participation in politics task force. Further, the Welsh Government has taken important steps, including exempting safety-related expenditure from campaign finance limits, and introducing voluntary diversity and inclusion guidance for political parties, guidance which I know my own party, Plaid Cymru, has engaged actively with. During the recent Senedd election, the Jo Cox Foundation also contributed to the development of a digital safety guide for candidates, working alongside organisations such as Shout Out UK, Glitch and Elector. I know that many candidates found this resource not only practical but reassuring at what can be a particularly exposed moment in public life. These are all positive developments, but there's clearly much more to do. So I'd therefore be grateful if the Noble Baroness Lady Royal could provide an update on the responses received from institutions and bodies in Wales to these recommendations, and whether she anticipates any barriers to their full implementation. And I'd also like to ask the Minister a specific question relating to the recommendation directed at His Majesty's Government, namely what consideration has been given to expanding the remit and resourcing of the Fixated Threat Assessment Centre to cover members of the devolved parliaments, in addition to its existing responsibilities for members in the other place and First Ministers. My Lords, if we're serious about honouring Jo Cox's legacy, we must ensure that public life remains open, safe and respectful. Civility is not a constraint on political disagreement. It is a condition that makes healthy disagreement possible. So we must ask ourselves, what kind of politics do we want to model for those who come after us and for the communities that Parliament is here to serve?
My Lords, Jo Cox was a dear friend, and it is so hard to realise that 10 years have passed since her tragic murder. I want to thank my noble friend Baroness Royal for tabling the motion for this important debate, and also for her continuing brilliant work chairing the Jo Cox Foundation. We commemorate Jo's memory best by holding fast to what she said in her maiden speech in the House of Commons, and that every single speaker in this debate so far have quoted, that we have far more in common than that which divides us. We need surely to relearn that lesson now more than ever. The Civility Commission and the Jo Cox Foundation help us to do so. Their focus is particularly on the abuse and violence directed at elected representatives. They are about promoting a respectful, inclusive politics. We need only to think of Jo Cox herself, of David Amos, of Stephen Timms, but also of the levels of abuse directed at many other politicians at both national and local level, especially abuse directed towards women representatives and towards political representatives of colour. This can never be right. Respectful disagreement is what democracy and democratic politics ought to be all about. But it goes further than this. All too often at the moment, the response of some voters and some political figures to issues and challenges is to resort to hatred and violence. The scenes we saw in Southampton and elsewhere in the aftermath of the tragic death of Henry Novak, and what happened in Belfast following the assault on Stephen Ogilvie, are obvious recent examples. What happened to Henry Novak and Stephen Ogilvie was, of course, unimaginably awful. But there are some political figures in our country who will turn tragedy into a political opportunity for rage and hatred and violence. Such a response, however, diminishes them, undermines our community and society, and does huge damage to our country. It stems ultimately from fear of difference, fear of otherness, and the prejudice that follows from that. It's what gave us nearly 40 years ago the wretchedness of Section 28. It's what has fueled much of the rise of the far right around the world. It's what leads to manufactured, whipped-up protest about migrants and asylum seekers. There are, of course, good and bad migrants. There are good and bad members of society more generally. but manufactured outrage is primarily something fostered by bad actors. Let's instead listen to the families of Henry Novak and Stephen Ogilvy, who have bravely asked us all not to turn the tragedies that have affected them into weaponized division and violence. Let's listen to the wise words of Jo Cox, reminding us that we have so much in common. Let's celebrate the richness and diversity of our communities. Let's hold fast to the idea that we only make progress when we unite, when we do things together, when we do not foster division and hatred. Let's do better.
My Lords, it is a privilege to speak in this debate and to remember the amazing Jo Cox, who I met when she was chair of Labour Women's Network and I was starting my political journey, spending a weekend together in Bristol on a Labour Women's Network training course. She shone brightly, and we heard many testimonies last Thursday in the other place about how being in Jo's presence changed people for the better, how she drew people together, creating connection. In my maiden speech, I spoke about my preoccupation with how we live well together, and 5 months on, I am more preoccupied than ever. The 3 interconnected priorities of the Jo Cox Foundation, set up in her memory, are sadly unrelentingly relevant to us today. Addressing loneliness, civility in public life, and grassroots community work bringing all kinds of people together. There is a need to urgently and comprehensively address and think through on-the-ground solutions as well as legislative policy levers that create spaces and places, physical and otherwise, that enable everyone in society to thrive. There's some brilliant suggestions in the Civility Commission recommendations, some of which have been adopted, and we've heard about the excellent work today of the youth sector from my noble friend, Baroness Morgan. This desire is not born out of a utopian idealism, but as my noble friend Baroness Staker pointed out, it's born out of living and working in diverse settings. My experience in Islington taught me similarly. From community centres to the council chamber, it is possible to build community, to build empathy, to increase understanding, and to seek the common good. Connection with other human beings is essential to this. Listening is essential. Being open to learning is also essential. Kay Tempest says this better than I can in the song People's Faces. It's hard to accept that we're all one and the same flesh, given the rampant divisions between the oppressor and oppressed. But we are, though. More empathy, less greed, more respect. The last several decades have seen our social fabric stretched thin and to breaking point. In an often atomised and individualistic world, there is an urgent need to renew communal life, to renew solidarity, to commit to being together in spaces with people who do not look or sound like us, to challenge ourselves to listen well and ask questions. Human beings are amazing. We are constantly evolving, continually being made and remade, every day becoming and emerging. No one is fixed in their identity. No one is complete. And because of that ongoing evolution, it means there is always hope. And there is always the possibility of change and of shift. And I've seen that in my work in prisons, in my work with people in addiction, and in my own life, day by day. Sometimes it's little by little, and sometimes it's all at once in this giant wave. People can and do change. Communities can and do change. Connection with other humans, a sense of belonging, doing something to meet the need of another. The great late Archbishop Desmond Tutu knew a thing or two about helping people to live together well, and his whole work was grounded in the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. My humanity is caught up and inextricably bound up in others. And because my humanity is bound up with others in this nation, I cannot ignore the pain and rage spilling out in Belfast, in Southampton. Neither can I ignore the fear and terror of my friends who are people of colour and the things they're expressing, the fear they're expressing about going about their daily lives. And I cannot ignore the survivors of trafficking I met last week with Sophie Hayes Foundation telling me about the failings of so-called safe houses and the failings of the national referral mechanism. My humanity is caught up and inextricably bound up in others. Connection and listening. I don't know what that looks like in every community up and down our great nation. I know in my community, it looked like the Arsenal parade. It looked like an interfaith meal, the community homework club. And my lords, we have a responsibility, as others have pointed out in this house today, to foster community, to foster connection, to share a meal, to be careful how we speak. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas took the face of the other as his foundational ethical concept, encountering another precious and totally unique human being, face to face. Human connection, seeking to understand, and as legislators, a commitment to listen, learn, and collaborate with communities to find answers so we can live together well. I'm not afraid of hard work, so let's go. Rolled up sleeves, sharp minds, soft hearts. The common good must be sought, because we have far more in common than that which divides us.
My lords, I would like to pay my respects to Jo Cox's family and to all her friends, and also to thank my friend Baroness Royal for arranging to have this debate today and the work of the Jo Cox Foundation. Because without the work that they have been doing, we would not be here today. The communities would not be in the situation they are, and we would not be training women to come into public life. And more we need to do this, and more we need to work with schools and other institutions so that young people know, like the Girl Guides and others, that every door is open to them. And I mean every door is open to them. And I was lucky to be brought up being told that every door was open to me. But not everybody has that opportunity, or they are bullied in every way, from being bullied at school, being bullied at work, being bullied somewhere. When somebody is bullied, they go into their house, they go into a room, and they never come out of it again. And that is where we have all these problems in many ways in the community. As part of our role is to stop that happening. I first met Jo when she was working at Oxfam, and then when she came to the House of Commons and I was here, she introduced me to the work they were doing on Syria and also White Helmets, which we worked together on until I still work with them, but me and Miss Jo did deeply. I also went just after Jo died to Trafalgar Square when we had a memorial outside, and I brought home, which Baroness Royal has seen, one of the placards that we had that day, and brought it home, got it cleaned, and I had it framed. And I have that at my desk, and it reminds me every day about what we should be doing and why we should be doing it. It is so important to ensure that women, which make up 50.7% of our population in this country, what percentage of them are not in public life? They're not in public life because they're not persuaded to be in there, or when they've thought about it, they're bullied and saying, not for them, or they try it and they're bullied. We have to insist that women are selected at every level. Otherwise, we will not have the right form of communities. They will not inform their children to do this also. For example, there should be more women magistrates. There is a big shortage of magistrates, and women and young girls should be taught about the magistrate system so that they know at a later life that they should apply and to be trained. As far as the situation in terms of MPs, councillors and other people in public life, the whole question of being bullied has now got beyond it, I'm afraid, by the rhetoric that we're seeing outside, and we have not taken it seriously enough. We now have to take this seriously, and if necessary, as Jo Cox Foundation has said, we have to take stronger legislation, because councillors should not have stuff thrown at their doors, eggs thrown at their cars. their children interfered with, tainted at school, tainted at university, and so on. It is absolutely vital that we follow the recommendations of the Jo Cox's recent report and those in Better in Common, because we want a society that is together, that's going to thrive, because if we don't thrive, our country will not thrive. And that is why it is important too that we encourage women in public life to apply to be on boards at every level, whether it's local level or international levels. And we take men with us as well, but it is men and women working together in communities, and to stop what we're seeing over the last couple of years, including what we're seeing in the media and on the web. It is disgraceful, and we must do everything we can to stop it happening, because this abuse must cease. Thank you again for having this debate today, the report, and we must continue to build on this report and to have further reports with this. Thank you.
Can I thank the Noble Baroness Royal of Basildon for introducing this debate and raising the importance of community, of respect, of getting involved, and of the work of the Jo Cox Foundation. I do need to declare that I am still a councillor in Central Bedfordshire. I particularly want to thank Lord Bates, because I thought this debate might be a bit of a downer, but you really uplifted this debate, and I think we're all feeling much better for that. And I think that is the right legacy for Jo Cox and others, for us to feel good and not bad. And we should look up, not down, and recognise what a wonderful country we live in, and that the vast majority of people are good. We need to cherish and protect that which makes our country great. We need to rely on our politicians to lead and develop our country. We want the best politicians. Politicians should not need to continually look over their shoulder for threats when they inevitably have to make what will be difficult decisions. Because there will be difficult decisions for all politicians. I particularly want to focus on councillors. As an ex-chairman of the Local Government Association, you might not be surprised. Councillors are embedded in their community, and I would say in many ways face greater risks because they're well known. Doesn't matter whether your address is published or not, most people know where you live as a councillor because you are part of that community. The LGA survey in 2025 showed that 72% of councillors have faced abuse. 50% were subject to misinformation, and 25% had threats of violence. Now, we want the best councillors, and traditionally many councillors were not particularly political driven. They just basically wanted to help their community, do what was right. Maybe it was try and get a leisure centre built. Maybe, like me, they were fed up with too many potholes. Whatever it was. But it wasn't because they were, I am definitely a strong Labour person or a strong Conservative person or whatever it was. They just wanted to do good. And that was why, when I was chairman of the LGA, I launched the Debate Not Hate campaign. Being topical, to play the ball, not the player. As the Noble Baroness Shah said, we need to recognise what we say matters. In the age of social media, comments made will inevitably be exaggerated. They will be misquoted, they will be distorted, and frequently snowball. One of the reasons I like door knocking is that I actually get the chance to talk to somebody for 5 and 10 minutes. Pretty much never have I walked away from a door and had somebody say, "You're a terrible person." They may still disagree with me, but at least we had the opportunity to realise that we were coming from different angles. But, you know, we could be wrong, but we weren't bad. And I think that's really important when we have our debates. We shouldn't imply somebody is wrong because they are bad. They're wrong because we may have a different set of values, because we don't agree with their analysis. But it doesn't make them bad, and I think that's a shortcut that causes huge problems. And the risk, I would say in reality, as the Noble Baroness Dacres of Lewisham said, is that you only get the people who are thick-skinned, to which I would add also the highly motivated, to stand. And that's not good. That's not good for our country, that's not good for our local communities. And it's not enough to talk about community. We need to live in and be comfortable with our actions, that we respect each other and we don't give the opportunity for this foul abuse.
My Lords, Jo Cox, as many of you know so well, only had 13 months as a Member of Parliament before the tragic, horrific end to her parliamentary career. but it is a huge tribute to her legacy, epitomised by today's debate, that her impact has been far greater than, frankly, many people have served for rather longer. It is a huge tribute to her. Now, my own path in politics never crossed with hers, although I did spend, like her, some years in politics in Yorkshire. But I know other members of the Liberal Democrat benches speak very fondly of their memories of working on a cross-party basis with her. And her legacy is an important one, because her work, her beliefs, her commitments are, 10 years on, still so relevant, both to strangers to her like myself and to those who have the privilege of the happy memories of working with her and the friendship they experienced. Happy memories, of course, tinged with sadness of knowing what has since been missing in their lives. An important part of her legacy is, of course, carried forward by the Jo Cox Foundation, and I pay tribute to its scope, its ambition, and its necessary persistence. There is, of course, a positive, a happy upside, so neatly epitomised in Lord Bates's speech earlier, to the challenges that the Foundation tries to help us see through. But there are also some grimmer ones as well, and to focus on just one aspect of those, I think we've heard both in today's debate and indeed in our recent debate a few days ago, focusing on abuse and intimidation in local government specifically, just what a serious challenge that is. And it's quite shocking that the LGA survey of councillors involved in the May elections this year found that 70%, nearly 3 in 4, had faced at least some form of abuse or intimidation. And we quite rightly worry about the safety and the security of parliamentarians, but councillors often have far fewer security provisions, far less support available to them, and those threats, that danger, can feel just as real and just as damaging and corrosive to our democracy as it does to parliamentarians. And we've seen the importance of the Jo Cox Foundation's work on civility in our politics. Also, in a way, this week, with the news at the beginning of this week of the conviction of 2 people for arson offences related to the Prime Minister. Now, an important part of that story, of course, which no doubt we will return to in one of the debates next week, are the Russian links of those people. But foreign powers can only incite violence in our politics if people within this country are also willing, able to be enticed into violence themselves. And we're reminded also, I think, of one of the challenges the Jo Cox Foundation rightly faces up to. Every time, frankly, we look at our phones, every time we turn to see what is new on social media, and we have to battle against that temptation that those algorithms deliberately have to try to pull us into extreme emotions, to try to secure our time and our engagement, but that also often means inciting and encouraging our anger, often even our dislike of others. And although there are many positives of social media, there are many positives indeed that we shouldn't forget, so often it pulls us towards division, it pulls us towards anger, even hatred, and in the worst cases, violence. And so while I think there is broadly, as we've heard in the speeches today, a broad understanding and a broad shared commitment to face up to these challenges, I think it's also fair to say there is a widespread feeling that whilst it is welcome that, for example, the government has been listening on many of the issues that have been raised in today's debate, there is also a general concern that more needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly. And just to give 2 simple examples, I've mentioned the importance of the safety of local councillors and those involved in local government. In particular, we heard in the debate a few days ago about, I think it's fair to say, the very mixed reputation that Operation Ford, the police activities to help protect councillors, has. In some cases, rightly, very highly praised, but often people feel it is frustratingly short of what is needed to properly protect them. And we've also seen the importance of continued commitment to action, and maybe even, hopefully, an acceleration of action in the continuing controversies over the ability to create non-consensual nudes of people on using the Grok tool. And I think, obviously, that is a problem that affects many people in many different ways, but people who are prominent in public life in some way, such as people who put themselves forward to stand in elections, are particularly vulnerable to those issues. And we've seen a sequence of claims by Grock about how they are dealing with those issues, so far always followed by more journalistic investigations showing that actually the issue has not been ended. So as we remember Jo Cox and others, such as Sir David Amess, and also, for example, in my own party, particularly Andrew Pennington, who lost his life protecting Nigel Jones, then a member of the other House, and later a member of this House. Their memories, I think, should prompt us to do more, to move more quickly, and to honour their legacy.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to contribute to this debate today, and thoroughly embarrassing and sitting there humbling to hear the contributions of many members. It's with a deep sense of duty that I rise to address the work of the Jo Cox Civility Commission and the broader imperative of safeguarding those who participate in public life. The murders of Jo Cox and Sir David Amess were not merely acts of violence against individuals, they were profound violations of democracy, that democracy that binds our society together. But they also remind us of something else, the values that Jo Cox lived by, working together, respect for others, and a belief that we have far more in common than that which divides us. And I think every speaker has mentioned that, so in itself I think that's a really good testament. Those values must shape not only our response to rising hostility, but the kind of political culture we wish to build. Yet despite the clarity of the Commission's recommendations and the urgency of the threat, the Government's response has been insufficient to meet the scale of the challenge before us. My Lords, the Commission issued 28 recommendations, yet only 7 have been adopted so far, and I think we'd be all encouraging that the rest should be looked at very, very quickly. It's particularly troubling for someone like myself that none of the recommendations relating to local government have been implemented. As has been said, local councillors, who often serve without any staff, without security, and without the institutional protections afforded to members of either house, remain acutely vulnerable. As a former leader of Bexley Council, I know this vulnerability all too well. My colleagues and I were ourselves subjected to sustained abuse, often anonymous, often keyboard warriors, often deeply personal and mainly inaccurate, simply for carrying out the responsibilities of public office. The fallout impacting both officers and members, their health, their families and their lives. It's an experience shared by councillors across the country, and it underlines why the Commission's recommendations on local government cannot be treated as optional. The Commission's call to expand Operation Bridget to support local councillors was clear and unambiguous. The Government's inaction leaves a significant gap in our national resilience, and it's entirely proper to ask how we ensure local democracy is not treated as a secondary concern. The Government frequently cites the Online Safety Act as evidence of progress, yet the lived experience of elected representatives tells a very different story. As has been mentioned, the 2025 survey of members of Parliament revealed levels of threat and intimidation that should trouble every member of this House. Women and members from minority ethnic backgrounds face disproportionate levels of abuse. Candidates in the 2024 general election were twice as likely to face abuse if they were women, and 3 times as likely if they were from minority ethnic backgrounds. The Commission's recommendation that social media companies provide enhanced support to candidates, particularly during election periods, remains unimplemented. My lords, the dangers of social media are no longer abstract. They influence those who feel able to stand for office, who feel safe to speak, and who feel welcome in public life. A third of girls and young women now say they are deterred from entering politics because of the hostility they see online. If we do not address this, we risk losing a generation of talent. Furthermore, the Commission identified the absence of central government unit as one of the principal obstacles to progress. Without such a unit, efforts across police forces, regulators, political parties and tech companies remain fragmented and inconsistent. The renewal of the Defending Democracy Task Force is welcome, but it's not a substitute for a dedicated, properly resourced coordinating body. The Commission was unequivocal. This is a systemic challenge requiring a systemic response. The government must provide one. My lords, the Commission's call for impartial political and media literacy to be embedded in the curriculum is both timely and necessary. Yet the government's proposed reforms will not take effect until 2027, with the teaching beginning in 2028 to 29, 5 years after the Commission's first call to action. In a digital environment where misinformation spreads in seconds, this delay has real-world consequences. And we must recognise that civility is not only about how we conduct politics, but also about how we sustain community cohesion. Loneliness and social disconnection remain significant challenges. They weaken trust, reduce civic participation, and increase vulnerability to polarisation. Jo Cox understood that democracy is strengthened when communities are connected. That's why the Great Get-Together, now marking its 10th year, matters. It's a reminder that respect is built locally through the simple act of bringing people together. Within the Representation of People's Bill, we welcome the measures that protect candidates from harassment and intimidation. But we remain vigilant against any drift towards the policing of legitimate political expression. Democracy must protect those who serve within it, but it must also preserve the right of citizens to criticise those who hold power. My lords, at the heart of this debate lies a simple truth. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires care, vigilance, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable realities. The Jo Cox Civility Commission has provided a thoughtful and comprehensive blueprint for strengthening the integrity of political culture. It is now for the government to act, not with selectivity or delay, but with the seriousness that this moment demands. If we fail to protect those who serve, we risk diminishing the very institutions upon which our freedoms depend. If we fail to foster respect, we risk losing the trust that holds our society together. And if we fail to work together, we risk forgetting the message that Jo Cox gave us, that we are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us.
My lords, that's been an incredibly thoughtful and well-informed debate, and I'm very pleased to respond for the government. I'd like to thank my noble friend Baroness Royal for opening the debate, and all noble lords who have spoken for some outstanding, truly outstanding contributions today. I want to start by paying tribute to all those who worked to preserve Jo's legacy. Tuesday marked 10 years since Jo's tragic murder. Now, my thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, will be with her family and friends, with Brendan, with Kulan, with Layla, and of course our wonderful colleague in the other place, Kim Ledbetter, Jo's sister. Last week, my colleague, Minister Ali McGovern, led a debate honouring Jo and her legacy. Members spoke of her civility, courage and determination, and that she was a fierce advocate for those in need. And I want to take a moment now to echo these sentiments in this House. The hatred and violence which led to this senseless act has no place in our society. And I'm grateful to those who've worked tirelessly over the last decade to counter violent extremism and to bring our communities together. My noble friend Baroness Royal mentioned Sir David Amis, and I have an abiding memory of working in Southend Council on a peer review on the first anniversary of Sir David's murder and feeling the enduring impact of his loss. Again, and even in the wake of tragedy, the number of people who seek to come together greatly outnumber those who aim to divide. Now more than ever, it's imperative that we build stronger and more resilient communities. This is the key to bringing people together, restoring pride in place, repairing social cohesion across the UK. It is the core priority for our government. However, in today's uncertain and changing world, community resilience has also become a matter of national security. We all know hostile actors, both at home and abroad, now seek to sow division and undermine local resilience as a means to pursue their own agendas and undermine our national interests. We know that a strong nation demands strong communities, and we will prevent subversive forces from undermining the community bonds that are the very foundation of this country. Despite the threats we face, I am confident in the foundations we are building on. When people think of resilience or community strength, they often invoke images of the Blitz spirit, nostalgic for a sense of defiant community that they fear may be lost. But I put it to you, this resilience endures. As we were reminded by my noble friend Baroness Smith, and I see this every day in my own community, not least when around the people that are there every single day in my community. And it was just last Sunday I met with 25,000 people and hundreds of community groups and organisations, musicians, dancers, sports people, politicians of all stripes, local businesses, all gathered together to celebrate our town at Stevenage Day. That was on Sunday. And I was very grateful to the Noble Lord Bates for his reminder of that fantastic reminder he gave us of our history and our legacy. We all celebrated Scotland's World Cup win on the 14th of June and England's fantastic win over Croatia last night. I think it was Baroness Hyde also said she wasn't going to mention the Arsenal parade, and I'm not going to mention the Arsenal parade either, but you know, it was estimated there were 1 million people there all celebrating together. I welcome Baroness Granger's comments and celebrate the first all-British podium in Formula One since 1968. And I'm only wheedling that in because, of course, Lewis Hamilton was a Stevenage boy. But it was that first joint podium. And I have to say, in relation to Lewis Hamilton, he has invested very heavily in ironing out some of the inequalities in STEM through his Mission 44 project, and I'm really grateful for that. My noble friend Baroness Morgan reminded us of the veritable army of volunteers out there who support our young people in sport, in scouting and guides, and a myriad of other activities. Their work often goes unrecognised, and I think we should celebrate what they all do. And as Lord Jameson said, we should celebrate the enormous good in every community. As ex-councillors, many of us in this room see this every day in our work. So this resilience endures. We saw it at the height of the COVID pandemic when neighbours came together to support each other. They shopped for the elderly and delivered prescriptions for the vulnerable. In the face of sickness and isolation, communities united to make sure no one was left behind. And more importantly, in the wake of the unrest that gripped Southport in 2024, local residents came together to rebuild their neighbourhood. And I must say I had a real lump in my throat when I saw that young man helping to rebuild the wall that had been knocked down the day after that happened. Amidst the grief of community tragedy, people took a stand against prejudice, clearly saying that this violence was not in their name. And I'm going to use Jo's words too. We are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. Now, when building strong and resilient communities, it's important to remember we are not defined by our lowest moments, but by how we respond to them. To this end, government is taking tangible action to support community resilience across our country. In March this year, I presented the Social Cohesion Action Plan to the House. Cohesion isn't about suppressing differences. We should embrace and celebrate our diverse communities, but it's about renewing a shared social contract rooted in our fundamental British values: democracy, the rule of law, on which my noble friend Lord Hermer has spoken so powerfully, on individual liberty, and on mutual respect and tolerance. Our plan, entitled Protecting What Matters, sets out our cross-government approach to building confident, cohesive and resilient communities. Of course, this agenda necessitates a whole-of-society approach, and it doesn't fall within the remit of just one department. To build resilience, we're resetting our approach to counter-extremism, focusing on ensuring a consistent understanding of extremism across government, countering extremist influence in the UK and abroad, and strengthening measures against extremist abuse of our institutions. The plan also supports resilience to online harms, building on the Online Safety Act to provide greater platform transparency, stronger media literacy, protections for children and better crisis response during periods of heightened tension. More widely, MHCLG's Common Ground Resilience Fund will help deliver targeted cohesion and integration interventions and support local authorities and grassroots organisations to run practical initiatives that bring people together. But as my noble friend Baroness Shah and Baroness Dacre said, we must all show the leadership our roles enshrine. Words matter. We must watch our own, and we must call out those who forget how language can divide and intimidate. In relation to the Civility Commission recommendations, earlier this month I stood before the House and responded to a debate on intimidation of councillors. The examples of abhorrent behaviour councillors have been subjected to that we heard from my noble friend Lord Forbes and others was seriously disturbing, a stark reminder of the scale of challenge that faces us. Harassment and intimidation of candidates and elected representatives must not be treated as an inevitable part of public life, but recognised as a direct threat to our democracy and to democratic representation. I'm also aware of the vulnerabilities of some of our frontline workers. I was very pleased that the Crime and Policing Act introduced new protection for retail workers, and I've started a dialogue from my own department's perspective with the planning profession, whose members are often in public meetings and at the front line of people's frustration with the planning system. It's unacceptable that they, or anyone else doing their job, should be subject to intimidating or threatening behaviour. The Civility Commission has made a range of recommendations across sectors for national government, parliament, local government, police, the courts, political parties, politicians, regulators and social media companies. Clearly, we all have a role to play in creating a stronger, more resilient society, and this must be a joint effort, a joint responsibility, and I'm pleased the government has made progress in this space. As part of the Defending Democracy Policing Protocol, we have committed to funding Operation Ford, something that Baroness Smith mentioned. This provides a dedicated elected official advisor in every police force to provide security briefings and work with local authorities to coordinate appropriate security support where heightened risk is identified. Lord Pack raised the somewhat inconsistent application of Operation Ford. I heard that as well in last week's debate, and I will feed that back and see what can be done. And Baroness Smith asked me about the fixated threat assessment. I will write to her on that issue. We're also taking decisive action to tackle harassment and intimidation of voters, electoral staff and campaigners. We are changing the law so those convicted of intimidating or abusing electoral staff can be disqualified from holding or seeking elected office. This will bring electoral staff under the same protection already given to candidates, campaigners and elected representatives under the Elections Act 2022. And the Representation of the People Bill will allow tougher sentences to those who abuse candidates, campaigners, elected representatives and electoral staff. In addition, we will remove the requirement for election agents, including candidates acting as their own agents, to have home addresses published on the notice of election agents. With regards to publishing anonymised data on protected characteristics of election candidates, Government is committed to commence in Section 106 of the Equality Act 2010, and we are exploring when and how we can commence that provision. Careful consideration needs to be given as to how it might be implemented and the necessary supporting regulations and whether any phasing might be needed to implementation. Turning to some of the specific issues raised by Noble Lords in the debate, there was some very powerful speeches which included speaking about loneliness from my noble friend Baroness Royal, Baroness Morgan and Baroness Hyde. And we're working very hard to ensure that improving social connection and tackling loneliness are embedded in government policy making, including the Pride in Place strategy, backed by £5.8 billion over 10 years, the Men's Health Strategy and the National Youth Strategy, and there is a particular issue around young people and loneliness, and that strategy is backed by £500 million over 3 years. And that the youth strategy will provide safe spaces, fun activities and trusted adults to mentor and support our young people. And can I thank Baroness Royal for her welcome for the report, and of course I'm very happy to meet her. Baroness Shah, Baroness Gowdy, Lord Pack and Lord Jameson and Baroness O'Neill all referred to the harassment and intimidation of local councillors. And Lord Pack and Lord Jameson referred to some of the startling figures in the LGA survey, and of course I share the concerns that I'm very glad the LGA are doing that survey, but very alarmed by some of the figures it's showing us. So we do need to take decisive action on this issue and ensure people are not put off from campaigning and standing for public office. And that's one of the reasons why we're changing the law and why the provisions in the Representation of the People Bill will empower courts to give tougher sentences to those who abuse candidates, campaigners, elected representatives and electoral staff by introducing a new statutory aggravating factor. Baroness O'Neill spoke about work going on across the set of recommendations. Well, there is, although there are some that are formally approved, there is work going on right across the board, across the recommendations. So I can assure her we are taking those recommendations very seriously. My noble friend Baroness Royal and Baroness Dacres talked about local government standards, and we do intend to strengthen the current standards and conduct regime to make sure all local authority members embody the highest standards of conduct the electorate have a right to expect, and greater devolution will certainly rely on. We published a government response to a consultation in November last year, and we do intend to legislate on whole system reform, and those reforms will provide the tools needed to deal swiftly and fairly with misconduct in every type and tier of local government. My noble friend Baroness Dacres raised the important issue of media literacy, and the government agrees media literacy helps people develop the skills needed to question information, to judge credibility and build resilience to misinformation and other forms of harmful content. And on the 16th of March, DCIT published its Media Literacy Action Plan, a whole-of-government plan for media literacy that sets out clear priorities for the next 3 years. By 2029, the action plan aims to improve critical engagement with online content, including recognition of mis- and disinformation and access to trusted information, supported through schools, libraries and local services. And there's a great deal more going on in terms of the updated national curriculum following the independent curriculum and assessment review. So that is there's active work going on in that space too. My noble friends Baroness Royal, Baroness Shah and the noble lady Baroness Smith raised the very difficult issues of online harassment. The Online Act 2023, Safety Act, establishes a framework of duties overseen and enforced by Ofcom. In an electoral context, this framework means in-scope services must tackle illegal content where it amounts to existing offences, including offences such as incitement to violence, undue influence, foreign interference and false statements about a candidate's character. Where anonymous abuse doesn't meet the threshold for illegality, the Act's user empowerment duties, expected to come into force from 2027, require the largest services to make sure that they manage their interactions, including the ability to filter out content from non-verified users. It is simply not acceptable for platforms to shrug their shoulders and shrug off their responsibility to tackle this, and our government is determined to tackle it. In terms of supporting women and minorities in politics, issues raised by Baroness Dacres, Baroness Gowdy and Baroness O'Neill, the current UK Parliament is the most diverse on record and sees a number of firsts, including the number of women elected to Parliament, and the local government elections has risen. 40% of Labour members are now women. We don't have the overall figures on ethnic diversity of the House of Commons, but estimates available suggest there's been significant progress with that. And the government's plans will further strengthen women's role in public life, breaking down barriers to opportunity, tackling misogyny and creating more equal workplaces. We will encourage better political representation, including by ensuring political parties publish diversity data through commencing Section 106 of the Equality Act. But this is a whole system issue here. We've got to tackle the intimidation, the online abuse that people face, or we will just not encourage people to come into political life. The Noble Lady Baroness O'Neill did issue a challenge to me about leadership of this project. Government will not tolerate the harassment and intimidation of those who serve in public life, and that's why the Defending Democracy Task Force is chaired by the Security Minister with a mandate directly from the Prime Minister, and she's bringing together departments, policing, the Electoral Commission and our intelligence agencies to drive forward a coordinated and determined response to protect candidates and elected representatives from the threats. Harassment and intimidation of candidates and elected representatives must not be treated as an inevitable part of public life. So we need to make sure that this action goes forward. My Lords, this government is committed to strong, cohesive and resilient communities, and this will continue to be a priority for the remainder of this government. I thank honourable members across the House for their valuable contributions to this important debate, and I hope Noble Lords will continue to engage and work with us as we bring people together to restore pride in place and repair social cohesion. I want to close by thanking all those who worked so hard to honour Jo's life with this indelible legacy of protecting, promoting and strengthening our democratic freedoms. As Baroness Smith, my noble friend Baroness Hyde, Baroness Gowdy said powerfully, the Jo Cox Foundation has become a unifying force for good in our public and political life. And I want to end by thanking Jo. Jo, our sister. Her life, too short though it was, truly made a difference.
Yeah. Is it me? My Lords, what a glorious way to finish. I thank my noble friend, the Minister, and to think that we are a unifying force, I think that's a wonderful way to finish. Thank you so much. But I'm also grateful to all noble Lords who have contributed to this debate for sharing experiences, but also for their hopes and for expressing their fears, and for the welcome for the work of the Jo Cox Civility Commission and for our wider work, because, my Lords, I believe that strengthening our communities, addressing the epidemic of loneliness and nurturing respect in civility in politics, they are all inextricably linked, and they are the way that we have to address our challenge in making a more resilient society. But notwithstanding the divisions and difficulties in our communities and our country, there is always hope. And there are so many great things, so much positive action in our communities. And I, like everyone else, I just love the catalogue of positivity, which is going to go on my wall as well, my Lords. In fact, I might print it out and circulate it to all noble Lords who've participated in this debate. It's real positive action, that. But it's also uplifting that across the chamber today, where quite often we disagree agreeably, and that's fine, as it should be. Today we have agreed on all the points of this debate, and that, I think, is a matter of strength. We have all shown a great determination to bring about change where it is needed, and it is needed if we are to ensure a healthy democracy and a resilient society in which everybody feels safe to participate. We must hold firm to Jo's words. We must act. But I will end on a lighter note, and I would encourage all noble lords to participate, to join in a great get-together this weekend, and perhaps in the next 10 days to go and raise a glass to Jo in one of our bars where they are serving great get-together beer. Thank you, my lords.